Welcome to Dare, the show for innovators, entrepreneurs, and startup leaders who dare to shape the future. Your hosts today are Ned Hayes and Cecilia Mariani. Dare is brought to you by Darwaf, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. The Dare podcast is excited to welcome Julie Sandler to the show. She's the managing director of Pioneer Square Labs and a co-founding general partner of Pioneer Square Labs venture capital firm, PSL Ventures, focused on entrepreneurs in the Pacific Northwest. And prior to Pioneer Square Labs, Julie was a partner at Madrona. And she also, prior to that, was at Amazon, where she helped to launch the Amazon Kindle. Julie has a number of accomplishments. Hopefully, we'll talk about some of those today. Welcome to the show, Julie.
Thank you so much for having me, Ned. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, you and I have known each other for a while, but I know our audience might not know much about Pioneer Square Labs. So tell us about that. What do you do there? How did you come to make that happen?
Amazing. Well, so PSL, as you say, is two things. We are both a venture studio. Indeed, I think we're the largest venture studio by most every metric in the Pacific Northwest now. And we're also a pre-seed and seed stage focused venture fund. We started out as just a studio. The studio was raised almost $50 million across 3 entities since our inception in 2015. We've spun out, I think, 36 venture-backed companies, spin-outs that have spun out of our studio. The studio really co-creates from scratch totally new companies with local entrepreneurs here in the Pacific Northwest. I think about a third of those companies are women founded, a third are BIPOC founded. That's not a mandate, just a focus, I think, on making sure we're diversified across every smart dimension. We also operate a separate venture capital fund. We're on our second fund. So our first fund was $80 million. Our second is $100 million. We invest in companies all over the region. We prefer to lead and co-lead investments. We'll also, opportunistically do participating investments in companies as well. We don't actually lead investments in studio companies. We'll invest via, participating smaller positions there too. But most of the time on the venture fund side is focused on investing in companies that are external to the studio, companies based all over the Pacific Northwest. And most of the time, the companies are at formation. One of the unique things about the venture fund too is the fact that it is affiliated with Pioneer Square Labs. And we set the structure of the fund in a unique way, whereby we took a big piece of the carried interest, the upside in the fund, and we allocated it to every single person on the studio side who is building, venture-backed companies real time. So every engineer, every designer, marketer, product person, ops, finance, recruiting, everybody on the studio side rallies around companies across the PSL ecosystem, both on the studio side as well as from a more consultative perspective on the venture fund side to boot.
Wow. Thanks for filling us in on that. I want to back up to the founding of Pioneer Square Labs and Pioneer Square Labs venture side. As you said, these are two different entities, but you were part of the formative group that made that happen. How did it all launch?
Well, so I helped found our venture fund side, but actually our studio side predated my joining. So funnily enough, my former partner at Madrona, Greg Gottesman, who is now my partner at PSL, he was really the first to kind of bring everybody together on a studio side. It was based largely on, his experiences founding Madrona Labs when he was at Madrona, and his experience founding and launching rover.com, which was really his idea that he incubated when he was a managing director at Madrona. He helped, bring in the CEO, work with that CEO after he was the interim CEO at the beginning, and really kind of got excited about the model that, when you are able to have a good instinct on matching great ideas, great market opportunities with, A-plus entrepreneurs, a lot of magic can happen in being the person facilitating that or being the team facilitating that. So his goal was to create, a separate studio-focused model where you could do that in a way that was, yes, systematic, but also highly custom to the interests of every entrepreneur you work with. And that was back in 2015 when PSL got started. He brought together an amazing group of founders, including Jeff Entris, who you may know is sort of a super angel of sorts and
Yes, yes.
longtime venture investor in the region, alongside Mike Galgon, who was one of the co-founders of Aquantive, one of the region's biggest exits, and Ben Gilbert, who now is the co-host of one of the most successful technology podcasts on the planet called Acquired. And so that was the original group that started the studio. I joined about a year and a half later with the idea that I would explore whether there should be a separate, self-standing but affiliated venture capital firm, which ultimately we called PSL Ventures.
Right. And then you came into the whole world of capital raising and venture after being in product for a number of years. And so you bring that lens, and that's something I've always admired about you, that you've actually done the work. And I meet people sometimes on the venture side who haven't been an operator, who haven't actually been in the fight of trying to define a product, ship a product, et cetera. And their perspective is very different. And I think you bring a very kind of feet on the ground perspective. Could you tell us how you made the switch and what that switch has felt like for you?
I did. I started my career as a product manager and then ultimately leading product teams at really, really big companies like Amazon and Microsoft, and also really tiny startups. I, worked at a company called TeachStreet.com that ultimately got acquired by Amazon, and saw what the product building and ideation experience looked like during my time there. It's interesting, I'd say over the first several years that I was in venture capital, having the operator muscle, understanding what it's like, to work, in an organization, run a team in an organization, absolutely helped in being savvy and in the flow with entrepreneurs who, in particular, sell to organizations and were building companies themselves.
Yeah.
Over time, what became, I think, more and more interesting is coupling that set of experiences with new patterns on seeing companies start at very early stages and being a partner to a CEO over, a decade plus, and understanding what things look like in challenging moments, how they feel in good times, and everything in between, and building your own set of wisdom and patterns to help advise the other 50 companies that you're working with becomes even more powerful. So I always say this to people who are thinking about a role in venture and maybe say, oh, I don't know if I have enough operating experience yet, or
Mhm.
I don't know if I have enough investing experience yet. The cool thing about VC is it's a team sport. And
Mhm.
so, yes, I have some operating muscle from early in my career, but I get to work side by side with VCs from other firms who are former journalists and teachers, and yes, bankers or longtime VCs. And everybody around that board table, everybody around the cap table is able to support that founder in a profound and unique way. And so
Mhm.
I don't think it's this world anymore of like, oh, you're either a former banker or consultant or you're an operator. The industry has become so much more diverse and
Mhm.
appreciative of the forms of diversity that come by people who enter the profession and support founders through their own unique and differentiated lenses of experience.
That's very diplomatic of you and probably very, very accurate in terms of the diversity of voices that we have because, a number of years ago, it really was bifurcated. And
Mm.
now I think you have a number of different voices, different experiences, different people at the table. So speaking of difference, how have you seen the world of startups change, especially as we've really emphasized BIPOC founders and female founders and people who come from different economic backgrounds? Have you seen that change?
Oh, hugely. I've been in the venture industry now for, I think I'm going into my 14th year next week. Will be, I think, entering my 14th year. And yeah, when I started, it was not an industry that I would have ever dreamed of describing as diverse.
Mm.
And today, I would venture there's still a long way to go before you could be like, wow, what incredible diversity in the industry. But one thing that has changed are forums for connecting individuals, in particular decision makers at venture firms, with each other who come from perhaps underrepresented backgrounds across some dimension of their experience or demographics. And two, the people who show up at those forums, those support groups, those conferences, they're showing up in numbers, unlike anything I've ever seen before. When I started in the industry, I'd go to all of the, women in VC conferences or underrepresented investor events. And, you could kind of count the number of people there on
Mm,
your hands.
yeah.
And then, by contrast now, if you were to list all the women decision maker investors, in the Pacific Northwest alone right now, I think we're nearing 100. There were two when I started.
Two. Wow.
So when I go to, an all race conference, or, there's a big summit that happens every year called the Equity Summit, or, Half Moon Bay, there are hundreds and hundreds of women GPs showing up,
Mm,
of Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC VCs who are showing up, exchanging deal flow. And it's been a really profound way for me to think about how I support founders in raising their next round of capital, and in connecting my peers in the industry with really great opportunities too. It's not
mm.
just the old boys network anymore. There's a new network, new connectivity forming. And I think the entire innovation ecosystem benefits from that as a clear and direct result.
Right, absolutely agree. I mean, as somebody who has managed teams at large companies, at Microsoft, at Intel, seeing teams that are more diverse, that have different voices on them, those teams are actually more effective. So bringing more voices to the table makes the whole product better, makes the whole team better, makes the whole industry better.
I
And
totally agree. There's, such a profound greed case for diversity. Even if you're just like nothing but a pure capitalist, like forget about,
right,
like the right thing and the right way to operate a society or a company, but like just think about the greed case for it. Like diversification in all of its forms, whether you're managing a team or a portfolio, drives alpha. It absolutely does. Because guess what? Your customers and partners and
right.
future acquirers and board members don't all look the same. So you're doing an incredible economic disservice to not be proactive in thinking about it. And I don't think that's as much of a secret as it used to be when I started in the game.
Right. And also, I mean, as you just said, it's also the right thing to do. Let's just include everyone. Yeah. What a concept. Well, going back to our experiences shipping products, you shipped a product which I use a version of every day. You worked on the Amazon Kindle, and the Kindle I go to bed with, I wake up with, it's a product that has changed the reading experience for millions of people, perhaps hundreds of millions of people. And I'm curious if you could jump into that experience a little bit and what that was like, because I'm sure that was arduous to try to define a new category.
Mm. Well, it's interesting. I wasn't focused on the device itself. I was focused on the content ecosystem behind the Kindle. And that was a
Wait,
role.
wait, wait. So the Kindle would be nothing without the content. So I'm just saying.
That it's true, they go well together, one might. But what was interesting at the time was the notion of assigning value to
Mm,
a piece of digital content, and how and if that should vary from how you thought about the physical manifestation of that content. Up really until that point, even though there were some e-readers that you saw,
yeah,
here
they
and
weren't big.
they weren't
Yeah.
big. They weren't big. And, you know, there was in the publishing industry massive upheaval in
Mhm.
thinking about how should a consumer value the content versus the medium that the content
Mhm.
took. And there was a lot of fighting. There was like a literal war, I think, between, the big publishers, the small publishers. Amazon, of course, kind of famously has sharp elbows, but there were other, comrades,
I,
I think, in
I'm
that fight.
sure the publishers have some sharp elbows too, right?
Exactly. And seeing that play out as far as how we thought about pricing, how we thought
Mhm.
about directing traffic, how you thought about, flash sales or different ways you can bundle content together was a really interesting experience, because you had these stakeholders who in the end are pretty vulnerable. Like all creatives, all artists, all writers, when it comes to like supply chain and big business, are in a very vulnerable role, but they're in the most important role. To your point on, you need content for the device to be interesting. You need people writing the content for the content to be interesting. You need them to have sustainable lives and motion around the creative process. And one of the things I worry about as a byproduct of that set of experiences is, the economic pie for true creators across every category has been cut way too small. And
Mhm.
fewer people are excited maybe today to write books than they were, a generation or two ago. And I'm hopeful that, especially as we think about different art forms and different forms of media that, exist ahead in an ever-changing world, that we'll see some improvements in that. But net, there's no question that consumer experience, access to content, and expectation around content accessibility has been forever changed by that device in the publishing industry for sure.
Absolutely. Well, so you worked on products and you worked on content deals, as you pointed out, that kind of changed the face of the industry. So I'm curious if you could talk about any investments that are public or any companies that you're super excited about now that could change the face of the world.
We're really fortunate, here at PSL that, we've, as investors over the course of anywhere from, 10 to 25 years of our careers, been able to be a part of some really amazing successes, some, outright failures, and a heck of a lot in between. And, here at PSL, what's been especially gratifying is getting to partner with founders as they create companies that identify and build totally new market categories.
Hmm.
So one example of that is a company called Boundless Immigration, which is a company that basically takes the US immigration process across visas, green cards, naturalization experience, and automates it in a way that solves some pretty acute problems. If you have anyone in your family or in your close group of friends who have gone through that process, the stack of paper that you have to navigate through is this high. It's super high.
Yes. So I speak as somebody who had to choose between a different citizenship and US citizenship at 18. So I understand
Yeah.
that process, and so do people you know. So yeah, it,
Yes.
it's a
It's
mess.
it's absolutely a mess. My husband went through it as well. It's, as you
Mhm.
say, like, it's painful. It requires lawyers and second guessing and timelines that are unpredictable. And if you kind of think about what TurboTax did for, the tax process, this is sort of the next gen, maybe even I would argue like AI driven experience where software can make sure the applications are being completed effectively, quickly, efficiently, with some
Mhm.
humans in the loop. I would say some lawyers in the loop, even, to ensure the success rate of these applications is about as close to 100% as statistics will allow. The company's founded by Xiao Wang, who himself, is a first generation American. His family went through the experience, and he's just one of the most passionate, effective leaders that I know of in the Pacific Northwest. And
That's great.
he's actually now created a company that is the largest provider of US immigration services in the world. So that's been
That's a
really
great
cool to see.
testimonial to a real leader. Yeah.
Absolutely. He's great. And that company is not only a PSL Ventures investment, it's also a Pioneer Square Labs spinout. Greg Gottesman here, my partner, had been kind of tracking Xiao for a while as he was sort of a rising star at Amazon, and had always kind of hoped that they'd find, an idea that Xiao was excited to work on. And when the idea was very, early on in its story, really in its infancy, Xiao heard it and was like, yes, that's the one. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. And he came over here to start work on it. And we're really proud to get to be a piece of the Boundless story.
Mhm. Anyone else you want to highlight for our listening audience?
Yeah, well, I think everybody listening will roll their eyes because I'm going to sound like such a venture cliche. But it turns out we've been investing a lot over the past 18 months in a lot of generative AI, next gen AI type experiences. In fact, if you look at our most recent investments, it's a lot of vertical specificity. One of the things I'm really excited about right now is, even though you might argue there's all this hype around AI and generative AI and LLMs, the fact is you can solve customer problems in profound, exciting, meaningful ways, and in ways you could not have solved them even
Yes.
2 years ago, even 18 months ago. So I've been excited just about the thesis, particularly when you have a vertical where there's some type of data moat or some type of distribution moat. It's hard to have a technology moat anymore in AI. but you can find interesting proprietary distribution in verticals that haven't been as touched or reached before by this. So our last investments, some of which are still in stealth, are basically AI applied to new customer problems in real estate, defense,
Mhm.
education, industrial robotics. And we've been basically kind of going vertical after vertical that we've been excited about and understanding customer problems that we'd always kind of had our eye on, but couldn't quite solve with a unified application layer experience before. And we're investing pretty aggressively behind that thesis right now.
Yeah, you really put your finger on it by saying solving real customer problems, because just saying it has AI is not a solution to a problem. But saying I can get you information on this that's more accurate, that's better, that actually addresses your real need, that's the key. And that goes back to the promise of every piece of technology that has been delivered. If it's solving real problems, it goes somewhere. If it's just technology in search of a purpose, who cares, right?
It's so true. Like I can't tell you the number of people that, I encounter in a given week who maybe they're looking for, a new career path and they'll say, "Ah, Julie, I want to work in AI." And my reaction, I mean, is always sort of similar, which is
Like, why?
yeah, it's kind of like saying, "I want to work in software." It's such a broad definition, and it's more of a muscle for innovation, I think, than it
Mhm.
is a particular opportunity. What gets me excited, and what sounds like gets you excited too, is thinking and always starting with the customer. And
Right.
if aren't able to apply technology with a great why now thesis, then
Mhm.
it's probably not that exciting for a venture bet. Might make a great company, but it's probably not as exciting for, a venture scale, multi-billion dollar type swing in this day and age.
Right. Well, what you just said about people wanting to get into this, it does make me realize that 10, 15 years ago, it took so much more to get off the starting block. And now there are so many tools out there, including AI driven tools, but there's a lot of other off the shelf components that you can use to build something, even as a non technical founder,
Mm.
that you can really bootstrap yourself into a fully functional product to some level of functional, right? That you don't have to hire a whole dev team to build out. So have you seen that change too? Have you tracked how you can see something so much more formed at this point in time compared to 15 years ago?
Yes. It's such a perfectly timed question for two maybe insights that are current as of this week to share in reaction to that. One, I'm seeing in more and more companies that are raising with a plan to deploy that capital over a longer time frame. And
Mm,
given the market moment, you might say, well, that's probably because, things are uncertain in later stage financing climates, so you got to stretch your dollar more. But that's not the reason why that they're doing it. The reason why they're doing it is they're able to do so much more with less capital vis-a-vis R&D hiring and work. So for
mm,
instance, I don't need to hire as many engineers to build a generative AI focused product today as I did a year and a half ago. And in
wow.
fact, I see that in operating plans so clearly. There's fewer engineers being hired, at least at the beginning when you're kind of in that experimentation phase. You don't need as many engineers to run those experiments now. The second insight is that we were looking at our own code base here at PSL.
Yeah.
And we've got, I'd say, depending on the moment and the size of the team, anywhere from, 4 to 6 true engineers building product here. And if you look at the code base that we've been working on just this year alone, 60% of it now is not being written by human beings.
Wow. That's a big shift.
It's certainly you're testing it, you're having to evaluate it. There's
Mhm.
definitely humans in
Oh
that
yeah,
loop. Very
rigor
smart
goes into
humans.
it, but it doesn't mean you have to write it from scratch all the way through. Yeah.
Exactly. Which, as if like the day to day of your typical engineer, that is a profound change. And there's a lot of leverage that I think we haven't even seen yet in what it takes to get a company going today. And it's going to keep heading in that direction. I'm excited about that. I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, that really, really changes the game. So, one other question I wanted to ask is as you work with companies at PSL and beyond that in the larger community, do you have any tips for entrepreneurs? Where do you think people should focus? What should people think about? What errors do you see that you'd like to keep people from making?
The biggest thing I can think of is that a lot of entrepreneurs, when they have an idea, feel an instinct that they need to guard it, to
Mm.
protect, make sure nobody else hears about it because, gosh, I gotta get to this first, and it's always first mover advantage. And the advice that I would give to someone with that mentality is, you're wrong. I would the best thing you can do is talk to as many smart people as you can and treat them as sounding boards to the idea, to the
Mm.
customer value proposition, to the market. Odds are, if what you're building is something that you are the right person to build, it doesn't matter how public the idea is. In fact, when we work on ideas at PSL, we broadcast it to thousands of people, over our email newsletter, because we want people to reach out and engage with us on things they might find interesting, on learnings they've had, on customer ideas, on good hires, and key executives to bring around the table. Talk to 100 people before you start something. And if you feel equally excited after those conversations, or you have a new set of insights that maybe energize you even more, you're on the right path. And that's my big kind of contrarian advice for the typical entrepreneur psychology.
Great, thank you. Last question for our interview, which is, what do you dare to dream, Julie?
What do I dare to dream? I and my family am, I think, third generation Seattle.
Mm.
When my family came to the area, they were entrepreneurs in the Pike Place market. And I grew up, hearing about how difficult that journey was, and, the lack of supports along that journey, especially if you're a CEO, can be extreme. It can
Mhm.
feel very alone. It can feel very alienating, especially when people looking to you, partners relying upon you. And my wish for everybody who has a dream or who wants to start something new, especially here in this region, is that they find the relationships, the support, the mentorship, the advocacy that they need to not only build successfully, but also feel supported successfully. That's a big reason why all of us came together to start PSL. And it's a really core value for how we approach our work with entrepreneurs.
Gosh, thank you for the great insight and discussion today, Julie. Really appreciate it.
Such a joy to talk with you, Ned. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks to our guests today for their great insights on DARE, the podcast for innovators, entrepreneurs, and startup leaders. If you'd like your story to be featured on DARE, just contact us at info@darwaft.com. DARE is brought to you by Darwaft, the tech team that can make your vision a reality.